Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsom, and I'm here to break down UFC Vegas 53, which is headlined with a phenomenal fight between Rob Font and Marlon Vera. That goes down this Saturday night. But just before we get into those breakdowns, as always, there's going to be a Baze AI UFC prediction software recap from MMA Play 365, which will be on the MMA Play 365 YouTube channel. And in that recap, we'll go over the AI predictions from last weekend at UFC Vegas 52. There's a gem in there as well. We'll go over some of the good results and just talk about the event in general, so make sure you check that out. But straight into the breakdowns here. Rob Font versus Marlon Vera, a great fight in the main event, 5 rounds of this potentially, and I think this is a really good fight. It's a step up that I think Marlon Vera deserves. You know, he's getting his first main event slot, which is great, and I think that Marlon Vera is a dog fighter. You know, he doesn't go anywhere easily, he's always game. His striking is improving, but his background is in the grappling. That's where he's dangerous. But I think with Marlon Vera, he's just really hittable on the feet, and he has the most success in his UFC fights where he is able to get his opponents down because his jiu-jitsu is really, really good, and his ability to hold his opponents down is really, really good as well. But the thing is with Rob Font's striking is just on a different level. His striking's technical, he fires out in volume as well, straight punches down the middle, he's calm, he's composed, he picks his moments when he gets in and out of range. So I think from a striking perspective, if we're looking at a fight that goes over 5 rounds, I think if the majority of the fight is played out on the feet, then Rob Font's just going to have too much for Marlon Vera. Marlon Vera is going to be competitive. It won't be a whitewash, but like I say, the straight shots down the middle, the fact that Marlon Vera is hittable, the volume that Rob Font puts out there, the crisp, clean boxing, the technique, the distance management, sliding in and out of range, landing combinations, I just think it's going to be too much. But this is a mixed martial arts fight, and Marlon Vera is going to close the distance. He's going to try and get Rob Font down to the mat. And I think that he can have success in taking Rob Font down, but I'm just not sure how much success he has on top of Rob Font, especially after what happened in Font's last fight against Aldo. I think he's definitely going to be working on that get-up game, even though, to be honest with you, the get-up game prior to that fight was always good for Rob Font. So I'm surprised that Rob Font did lose the fight in the way he did against Aldo. Obviously, he was smashed pretty much in every round. He was winning pretty much every round until he got hurt, and obviously Aldo found the way to the mat. And I think that Marlon Vera's got to try and find that avenue down to the mat. I think over 5 rounds he's going to have some success doing it, but ultimately I don't think the fight's going to be won and lost on the mat grappling. I don't think there's going to be enough top control time and enough control time on the mat in the grappling department for significant enough amount of time for this fight to be won and lost there. I think the better work's going to be done on the feet. I think that's where the majority of the fight takes place, and because of that I just have to favour the speed, the movement, the boxing and the volume of Rob Font. So for those reasons I'm picking Rob Font to win this fight. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, it's a fight that I feel like I've seen 100 times already, but obviously I haven't. We've got Jake Collier versus Andrei Arlovski, and this is a very typical fight for Andrei Arlovski, fighting somebody that, you know, Jake Collier's been around for years, but Jake Collier, you know, he's got title aspirations, I'm sure, at least to try and get into the rankings, like I said, at the very least. So Andrei Arlovski provides a really good test for these fighters, because if you beat Arlovski, then you do have that something about you to potentially make that run into the rankings. If you don't beat Arlovski, then it's back to the drawing board, and he's almost like a gatekeeper in that respect. And I think Arlovski's performances are really inconsistent. So he'll have some performances where he's looking sharp, he's looking fast, he's looking powerful, and you can tell he's up for the fight. But then he'll have other performances where he sits back, low volume, slow-paced fight, trying to point away, trying to get the fight to a decision. And it's those types of fights that you normally end up seeing a split decision in as well. So Arlovski's performances are really inconsistent, but what I like about Jake Collier is this guy just comes forward. You know, he's got nothing to lose. He just doesn't care. He comes forward, he'll throw volume. And I actually think that, obviously Jake Collier, there was a bit of a joke around him when he first went up to heavyweight of how different his frame looked and his body looked compared to when he used to fight at middleweight. But I actually think fight on fight, he's getting used to that extra weight, he's getting used to being a heavyweight, and he's putting in better performances every fight. And I think Jake Collier is a fighter that is going to do well in this fight. He's a fighter that lands or can land over 100 strikes in a heavyweight fight over 3 rounds should he need to, which is definitely a very good trait to have as a heavyweight fighter. And of course, Arlovski's landed over 100 strikes as well, but Jake Collier consistently seems to be able to land good volume. He's aggressive, he comes forward, he doesn't mind getting hit if it means that he's going to land 2 or 3 punches on his opponents. And he's getting used to heavyweight to the point where he can start exploding now as well, with combinations, ripping to the body and head, and I'm making him sound like a world beater. He's not a world beater fighter. You know, I don't think he's going to hit the top 10 in the division. I don't think he's that type of fighter, but he's a fighter that tries hard and is efficient because of that. And I think that's where Arlovski's going to have problems. I think Arlovski's going to steal around somewhere down the line because Collier can slow down, and when I say slow down, he'll just have moments of inactivity, and I think that's where Arlovski will take advantage with his veteran experience. But across 3 rounds, which I do expect this fight to go to a decision, I think Collier's got the advantage here because of the volume and the explosions and the rip into the body and head as well. Arlovski's going to make this fight close. Of course he is. Pretty much every Andrei Arlovski fight is close, but I like Jake Collier to really just go that extra mile, have that edge in that volume and the speed, and just look better in the judges' eyes across the 3 rounds. So for those reasons, I'm actually picking Jake Collier to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Darren Elkins versus Tristan Connelly. And this is a really interesting fight. I feel like the UFC are now giving Darren Elkins very winnable fights. You know, there's no point putting Darren Elkins in there with an absolute beast that's just going to light him up. He's taken too much damage over the years, hence the tattoo, the damage tattoo across his chest. There's no need to put Darren Elkins in there against killers that are just going to wipe the floor with him and just potentially cause him further problems down the line and potentially later in life as well. And I'm not saying that Tristan Connelly can't go in there and light Darren Elkins up, but Tristan Connelly's a good fight, in my opinion, for Darren Elkins. I think Elkins could potentially have some issues with the striking out at range. I think that Tristan Connelly is probably going to be a little bit cleaner and a little bit technically better, but Darren Elkins is a dogfighter, so even if he is at a technical disadvantage from the striking, he'll make it ugly, he'll make it dirty, he'll make it gritty, and then once he gets in close and he starts wrestling and grappling, I do think that's where he's going to have advantages over Tristan Connelly. I mean, look what Elkins did to Darren Minner, who's a good wrestler, he's a good jiu-jitsu player, a good scrambler, and Darren Elkins managed to get on top of Minner and finish that fight. So I think with Tristan Connelly, I think that's where the biggest gap in skill is in this fight. I think Darren Elkins is wrestling, his grappling, and his just ugly, dirty, gritty, grinding style, along with the veteran experience that he's got as well, is going to be able to get him over the line. So for those reasons, I'm picking Darren Elkins to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Gerald Meerschaert versus Krzysztof Jotko, a fight that I also feel like I've seen 100 times, but obviously I haven't. I think it's a select group of fighters in this sort of group in the division where you've got your Meerschaerts, you've got your Jotkos, you've got your Eric Anders, and those sort of fighters I feel that all seem to be fighting each other at different times. And this is another one of those close fights that I feel where Gerald Meerschaert is striking, does need work, but it is improving. We do see improvements from fight to fight, even though they aren't huge improvements, they're improvements nonetheless. And then Krzysztof Jotko, once upon a time people were saying that he could potentially be a champion. Obviously that fell off a cliff, but he's still a good fighter. He's still training at American Top Team, and he's still in every fight. And I think in this fight it's clear striker versus grappler. I think Meerschaert's going to need to get this fight on the mat to win, whereas Jotko, I think if this fight stays on the feet, then he just pieces Gerald Meerschaert up, although he's got to be careful because Meerschaert does have sneaky power. But I think outside of that, I think if this fight does take place on the feet, for the most part, then I think Jotko wins. And I do think that's how this fight plays out. I do think there is going to be moments of wrestling and grappling. I think Meerschaert will have some success, but I don't think he's going to have success in at least two out of the 3 rounds in order to give himself enough opportunities to try and submit Jotko, or B, take the fight to the scorecards and win on a decision. I think if you go back and watch Jotko versus Serkinov was shooting some good takedowns, a big powerful dude with good wrestling as well, and Jotko's takedown defense is actually really good, and I think that's where Meerschaert's going to come unstuck. I think he is going to try and take Jotko down. I think Jotko is going to have to defend for maybe half a round, a full round. But once Meerschaert naturally starts tiring through the failed takedown attempts, or at least taking Jotko down and Jotko getting straight back up to his feet, I think Jotko's going to take over the fight from that point. I think he's going to piece him up on the feet. He's going to land more volume. He's a better technical striker. His range is better. His distance management's better. And like I say, if Meerschaert can get Jotko down for a long period of time, or at least 2 out of the 3 rounds, then he's going to give himself every opportunity to win the fight. But I just think that the takedown defense of Jotko is better than the takedown offense of Gerald Meerschaert. And for those reasons, I'm picking Krzysztof Jotko to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Jared Gordon versus Grant Dawson. I like this fight a lot. Both fighters used to fight at featherweight, now both fighting at lightweight. But the thing is, it begs the question why Jared Gordon doesn't cut the weight to featherweight anymore, because his frame does seem suited for that. And I think it's important in this fight because Grant Dawson is a young fighter that is just naturally growing into this body, and he's actually blown up to be a pretty big 155 at lightweight. So that helps Grant Dawson's game because he is a wrestler. Once he does get the fight to the mat, his grappling's decent as well. So with him being a wrestler and having a big frame and having strength and power advantages, specifically in my opinion in this fight against Gordon, it's definitely going to help him stylistically try to win this fight. And Grant Dawson is going to wrestle. You can always rely on that. His striking definitely needs work. It is improving from fight to fight. Again, just like I said with Meerschaert, you do see slight improvements, even though they aren't great improvements. Just very slight improvements. He can hang with UFC level competition, but the striking is just a means to the wrestling. And that's why you can rely on Grant Dawson to wrestle, because if he doesn't, then he's going to lose the majority of his fights. Because, like I said, his striking just isn't at a level where I believe he can win a 15-minute kickboxing fight. And the thing is with Jared Gordon, he's a good fighter. He's good everywhere. He's a good striker, wrestler, grappler, but I don't think he shines in any one specific area. He's just one of these really good all-round mixed martial artists. But the thing is with Grant Dawson, he's a specialist in that one area, and I think that's where it's going to matter in this fight. Jared Gordon isn't going to go anywhere easily. He's a dogfighter. He makes fights ugly and gritty himself, and he'll always be in the fight. But I think that Grant Dawson is going to be able to close the distance relatively easily. He's bigger, he's stronger, he's got more power, and with him being in the smaller apex cage, there's less distance to close the distance. So I think that Grant Dawson's going to be able to work less to close the distance, and I think once the takedowns start coming, Jared Gordon might defend the first takedown or the second takedown, but the chain wrestling of Grant Dawson is something that he's really good at, just putting those takedowns after takedowns together against the cage. And again, I think the strength and the power, physical advantages of Grant Dawson are going to be definitely prominent in this fight. I think we're going to be able to see it, and Jared Gordon might be able to get back up to his feet. Out at range, in my opinion, Gordon's definitely the better striker, but again, with that relentless wrestling pressure game that Grant Dawson's got, it could halt the striking of Jared Gordon. It could stop any fluidity in the striking, make him hesitant, because he's constantly thinking of when the next takedown's going to come and have to deal with it. So like I say, I think stylistically, Grant Dawson's got advantages here. I think physically he's got advantages as well. I think the wrestling and the grappling are going to be where the fight is won and lost, and because of that, I'm picking Grant Dawson to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a fun fight, my favourite fight on the card. We've got Andrei Fili versus Joanderson, Brito. And like I said, this is a really good fight. Initially, I thought that Fili was going to absolutely run through Brito. Look, Fili's one of my favourite fighters. He's exciting over the years. I've loved watching him fight. I've cashed bets on him as well. And like I say, I thought that Fili was going to run through Brito before I watched tape, just looking at the fight on paper, simply because Bill Algeo, Brito's last opponent, Brito lost to Algeo quite convincingly, in my opinion, even though it was close in parts. But Andrei Fili is a very similar fighter to Bill Algeo, but better in every area. So, you know, technically 2 + 2 = 4, but it doesn't work out like that in MMA. Any MMA handicapper will tell you that. And actually going back and watching Joanderson Brito's fights, this dude's a dog fighter, and he'll absolutely fight for your money if you've got a ticket on him. He'll come forward, he'll land combinations, he'll blend his strikes into his wrestling really well. And actually that was where his downfall was, because he became a bit too obvious with what he was trying to do against Algeo, and Algeo was just able to get good reads against him and be able to counter that the longer the fight went on. He knew when the takedowns were coming, and more importantly, he just knew what was coming and at what time it was coming as well. So I think with some slight alterations and adjustments to Brito's game here, he could be very dangerous, because if he doesn't make it obvious that he's looking to strike with you, then shoot a takedown, I think he's going to be able to do good work against Fili. And listen, Fili's wrestling is really good, so I actually don't think that Brito has got an obvious advantage in that area. I think overall Fili's the better mixed martial artist, but the fact that Brito's very forward pressure, and he was landing good shots against Bill Algeo, and I don't know why he was going to his wrestling, because he was beating Bill Algeo on the feet. He comes forward, heavy pressure, in your face, landing hooks, landing straight punches, in combinations, and Brito, from a fighter's perspective, is just a really tough fighter to deal with, because you're going to have to deal with that forward pressure. And with Brito being 5'8", he's going to have to force his way inside of boxing range, which he does by being aggressive. If it means taking a punch or two to land a couple of punches himself, then he'll do that. And I think with Andrei Fili, one of the main concerns that I've actually always had with Fili is he fights very close to his opponent's level. So if he has a step up in competition where his opponent is much better than him, he'll step his game up and he'll make it competitive. But on the flip side, if he fights an opponent that isn't as good as him technically and that he should run through, his performance drops. And again, it's a competitive fight. So anybody that's an underdog against Fili is going to be relatively live to some degree. And that, I feel is exactly what we've got in this fight with Brito, because I think Brito, like I said, he's not as good as a fighter as Fili, but Fili fights to his opponent's level. I think Brito, like I said, he'll fight for your money, he'll get in the face of your opponent, he'll look to try and knock your opponent out, he'll blend his wrestling in as well, and I think he's got enough tools with that aggression and pressure to be able to make this fight close enough to potentially sneak a win from Andrei Fili. Brito's a young fighter, we're going to see developments. Fili is potentially a finished product now, still a good finished product, but he's not going to be making those developments from fight to fight. And with everything included, and when you put everything together in the analysis, I think that Brito, like I said, in a very close fight could potentially sneak this one out. So I'm picking Joanderson Brito to win this fight. Then in the next fight, we've got Gina Mazany versus Shanna Young. I think this is a fight for Gina Mazany, if I'm being honest. Shanna Young hasn't looked impressive in the UFC. She's 0-3. She's been taken down in every fight. And this is where Gina Mazany is really good. Gina Mazany will look for takedowns. She will get topside. Now, if her opponents provide enough resistance in that first round from those takedowns, then Gina Mazany can tire. And we have seen that in previous fights. So that's definitely a concern from a Gina Mazany perspective. But outside of that, I think that Shanna Young is going to have difficulties with that pressure-heavy style that Gina Mazany comes out with, specifically in round one. Gina Mazany is going to try and close the distance. She's going to be trying to use her physicality against the cage, trying to get a body lock, trying to trip you down to the mat, and then if you get on the mat, she's got decent heavy pressure as well. Against a certain level of opponent, Gina Mazany can be really dominant. Obviously, the more she steps up her levels in competitions in the UFC and the division, then that's when she can really start getting unstuck, because she will get outshined by the better fighters. But in this specific fight, I think Gina Mazany is going to have a wrestling advantage. I think she's going to have a physicality advantage, and I'm just not impressed with what I've seen from Shanna Young to date. So for those reasons, I'm picking Gina Mazany to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got an exciting one. We've got Daniel Da Silva versus Francisco Figueiredo. Obviously, Francisco Figueiredo is the champion, Deiveson Figueiredo's younger brother. There is a bit of a difference, though, between the quality of the fighters. And when I say a bit of a difference, I actually mean a big difference. You know, Francisco Figueiredo's okay. He's a decent fighter, obviously. I think some people, especially the bookies as well, see him because he's the brother of Deiveson Figueiredo, that he must have that same sort of skill set and qualities, and that's just not true. Now with Daniel Da Silva, this guy is a wild fighter. He'll throw wild kicks from the outside. He'll look for takedowns from time to time as well. He's got good submissions. But the problem that I've got with the submissions with Daniel Da Silva is the predominantly submissions from his back, so the arm bars, the triangles, and you have to mind your P's and Q's if you're on top of him, because he will fire these submissions up very, very quickly. The thing is with Francisco Trinaldo, I think he's the better striker in this fight, and I think he's the more likely fighter to be on top. Now that's going to add some danger, like I've just said, because Daniel Da Silva's submission game from bottom is dangerous, but at some point when you fight in UFC level competition, which Francisco Figueiredo absolutely is a UFC caliber fighter, at some point, those arm bars and triangles are just going to run dry. They're going to stop, because you're just not going to be able to lock them on against the better level competition. And that's how I feel this fight's going to go. I think Francisco Figueiredo takes a little bit of time to settle into a fight. But like I said, I think he's going to match the aggression of Daniel Da Silva on the feet. I think when Daniel Da Silva's landing kicks, Figueiredo might try and close the distance, take him down off the kicks, or try and counter off the kicks as well. Figueiredo, for me, is the better striker. And when we're looking at the wrestling and grappling, I just think that although Daniel Da Silva's going to have moments in this fight, we are going to see the more or better moments with more control from Francisco Figueiredo in regards to that top control time. And as long as Figueiredo stays out of the way of one of those submissions from bottom, I think he can even ride positions out on top. Or if the fight does get back up to its feet, I think that Figueiredo, his striking is going to be enough, especially going into the second and third round with Daniel Da Silva, who does look to slow down a little bit. So I am picking Francisco Figueiredo to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Mike Breeden versus Natan Levy. Mike Breeden is predominantly a boxer. He's got heavy hands. And listen, if he does land on you, he will hurt you. This dude can crack. Natan Levy has definitely got to mind his P's and Q's here on the feet. He's got to be careful. He's got to make sure he doesn't get hit with hard punches or combinations. But the thing is, I think Natan Levy is more of a polished fighter. On the feet, his kicking game is good. The kicking game could potentially nullify the boxing game of Breeden. And what Natan Levy has in his back pocket is he has decent wrestling and good top control time too. Obviously, he did fall short in his UFC debut against Garcia, but Garcia's a good fighter, and I don't think Breeden's going to be able to present the problems that Garcia presented to Levy. And the thing is, when Natan Levy's at a disadvantage with the wrestling and grappling, that's where he seems to have problems. Where in this fight, I think that's going to be a big advantage for him with the wrestling and grappling. And I think that's the difference in this fight compared to the last fight of Natan Levy. On the feet, I think that the slight edge because of the kicking game, and then you add the punches in as well. I think Natan Levy does have that slight edge on the feet. But I do believe that the wrestling and grappling is going to play a part in this fight, potentially a significant part, and that's where Natan Levy is going to have advantages against Mike Breeden. I don't think it's going to be a whitewash. I think the betting line is a little bit too wide here with Natan Levy at like -225, -220. Should be a little bit shorter, but Natan Levy, I think, is a better mixed martial artist from an all-round perspective, and the advantages in the wrestling and grappling is where the fight could have significant impacts, and for those reasons, I'm picking Natan Levy to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Yohan Lainesse versus Gabe Green. Now, Lainesse is a really good fighter. He comes forward, he's aggressive, he lands hard combinations. He does need some work in regards to that striking, but from an all-round perspective, the dude's dangerous. He's a massive for the weight division. He reminds me a lot of Ponzinibbio, actually. I'm not quite sure why, but just that aggressive forward pressure, the hard punches, the combinations. He'll throw low kicks. He'll look to mix in some takedowns. His top control time doesn't really look the best, but obviously he's a big dude, and if he can settle on top, then he's going to have some form of heavy pressure. But on the flip side, you've got Gabe Green. And Gabe Green's a really good fighter himself. He's a dog fighter. Again, I know I keep saying this in the podcast, but we've got a lot of these gritty dog type of fighters that just don't go anywhere very easily. This guy, Gabe Green, went to war with Daniel Rodriguez, took some of his hardest shots. I think Rodriguez ended up landing like 175 strikes on Green, and he still didn't go anywhere. So Green's definitely durable. He definitely likes to be in the face of his opponents, and he's got cardio. And this is where I think the biggest advantage is for Green in this fight, because Lainesse, one of his downfalls in his fights is definitely that cardio. He slows down after the 5 to 6, maybe 7 minute mark, and Gabe Green just goes and goes and goes. So I think Lainesse has got a small window of opportunity here. I think he could potentially knock Green out. Green, like I said, is very durable, but Lainesse hits hard, and like I said, it only takes one punch with a 4-ounce glove to really start causing problems. So Lainesse definitely, I think, early in this fight has got a small window of opportunity, but if this fight goes deep into the second round and into the third round, I think we're going to see Gabe Green just do some really good work. He's got really good low kicks as well. We've seen Lainesse hurt by low kicks. So from a stylistic perspective, I think that the fight is very close, but I do give a slight edge to Green. But then when you're looking at the cardio and how much Lainesse slows down, I think it's very difficult to ignore that. I think Gabe Green is going to be able to survive the early dangerous moments, that window of opportunity that Lainesse has got. And I do think he's going to pull away with the fight later, potentially a late finish. If not, I think he's going to win the second and third round. So if the fight goes to a decision, he should have a 29-28. So I'm picking Gabe Green to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got newcomers. We've got Tatsuro Taira versus Carlos Candelario. And Taira is definitely a fighter that I think you should be keeping an eye on. This dude's exciting. When you look at his record, you will assume on paper that he's simply a grappler. He's got a lot of submissions, but actually when you watch his fights, the dude's got good striking as well, good range management. He's just an exciting fighter. He seems to never be in a boring fight. He'll really hone in on a low kick as well. And then when a fight hits the mat, listen, this is a dude that mounted his opponent and then hit a mounted triangle, ended up on his back, but obviously finishing the triangle. So this is a fighter that's just super exciting, that's got skills everywhere. Carlos Candelario is a decent fighter himself. He's got okay wrestling, he's got okay striking, but it's hard to be too excited when you watch him fight. And listen, maybe this is a fighter that develops the more we see him, and he might look like a different fighter on Saturday night of what we've seen previously. But I do find it hard to get behind Carlos Candelario in this fight, just purely because Taira's got good striking, good volume. Like I said, he hones in on the areas where he's hurting his opponents. His wrestling is a little hit and miss, but he can get fights down to the mat. And when the fight goes into that grappling realm, he's just so good. He's so experienced. You can see that his technical ability is really good down there as well. And like I say, I feel that even though this line's wide, I think he's around a 3-1 favourite. I think it's relatively justified here. I think he's definitely a fighter that we're going to be talking about after Saturday night. So I'm picking Tatsuro Taira to win this fight. And the final fight of the breakdown is a fight that I broke down last week. We should have had it last week. And listen, fair play to Chase Sherman, the minor health issues. He could have tried to look for a different fight, but he hasn't. And, you know, he's probably going to have an extra week worth of preparation against Alexander Romanov. We've got Alexander Romanov versus Chase Sherman on this card. Obviously, like I said, it should have happened last week. Alexander Romanov was around a minus 2,500, 25-1 favourite in this fight. It says everything you need to know. Listen, I broke it down last week. I'll quickly break it down again. I think Romanov's striking is going to be dangerous here. Chase Sherman, I think he's actually going to be dangerous for a couple of minutes purely because he's got nothing to lose here. He knows that it's a fight that he's probably going to lose. Maybe he won't say that, but deep down he knows that it's not a favourable fight for him. And he's got nothing to lose. He's signed a new 4-fight deal with the UFC, which is great. And he's going to come forward, he's going to wing bombs and try and take Romanov's head off early. So Chase Sherman, for the first 60 to 90 seconds, I think is going to be his window, but it's just not going to be enough because if he does come in overly aggressive, or even if he does land on Romanov, Romanov's a tough, durable dude, and if Sherman comes in overly aggressive, Romanov will just duck under, take him down, and ground and pound him or submit him, which I think is how the fight's going to end. I think it's going to end in round one with Romanov finding the takedown, and like I said, finding a ground and pound or a submission. He's got some good submissions as well, some unorthodox ones with the forearm choke and things like that. Listen, I think Sherman's outclassed everywhere here. Striking, wrestling, grappling, knockout power, submission threat. I think Romanov's got it all. I think it's a relatively simple fight for Romanov. He's just got to not take his eye off Sherman, like I said, for those first 60 seconds, because Sherman's going to come out hot. He's got nothing to lose. But like I said, I think the fight's going to be more than that. I think it's going to be more than Sherman coming out in 60 seconds and dead in Romanov. I think I'd be shocked along with the rest of the MMA world. Romanov's going to find his takedowns. He's going to find some ground and pound or a submission. Alexander Romanov to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. I hope you all enjoyed the breakdowns. I hope it all helps with your predictions, helps with your analysis when you come in to bet the fights. Listen, I appreciate all the support from you guys, the likes to the YouTube videos, the subscriptions to the YouTube channel. As always, I'm the one that replies in the comments as well. So drop your bets down there. Tell me who you're betting on. Tell me who you're confident on. We'll have a conversation. I will get back to you in those comments. Good luck if you're betting on Saturday night. Thank you for listening. I'm Newsome. We'll see you next week.